A fresh wave of attacks by Russian forces has once again flared up the ongoing war with Ukraine. The long drone conflict made headlines again after Russia fired close to 50 drones at several targets across Ukraine. One of the targets in Ukraine's Kherson region was a railway station. Ukraine's top officials revealed that at least 140 civilians were waiting for an evacuation train at the station when the strikes killed 5 people and wounded several others.
Складний день. Щойно була доповідь щодо обстрілу Херсону. Російський удар по залізничному вокзалу. Евакуаційний поїзд. Всі служби зараз на місці. Кількість убитих і постраждалих наразі встановлюється. На місці було багато цивільних. Усі оновлення, інформації будуть представлені відповідними службами.
The escalation comes just a day after Ukraine targeted and damaged a Russian warship at Crimea's port of Feodosia in the Black Sea. Ukraine and its Western allies referred to the former's attack as a major setback for the Russian Navy. In a parallel development, Russia's foreign ministry spokesperson claimed that Ukraine is preparing to use chemical weapons in the war.
Очередной антироссийской провокации с использованием отравляющих веществ западного производства, чтобы затем инициировать в структурах Организации Объединенных Наций и мировых СМИ новую кампанию по обвинению нашей страны в якобы преднамеренном использовании химического оружия.
This is not the first time that Moscow has made such accusations. Earlier too, the country said that it has undisputable evidence to prove that the United States and other Western allies are supplying Ukrainian forces with toxic chemicals. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis is a military expert and host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Is now joining us from Starling, Virginia. Colonel Davis, good to see you and thank you for making time for us.
You bet. Good to be here.
Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova claims that Kiev is preparing an anti-Russian provocation with the use of chemical weapons. How serious and impactful is that statement?
Well, Ukraine is obviously on the losing end of this war. They have been since at least June, when their offensive didn't work, and they're now desperately trying to mobilize more people to try to stave off, a Russian invasion or a Russian attack, rather, potentially this winter or next spring. So they're doing everything that they can. And whether there's actually a provocation that's going to use chemical weapons, I think is pure speculation at this point. Unfortunately, I don't put anything beyond any of the players in this, because when people get desperate, they do desperate things. Mm-hmm. If there's any grain of truth to it at all, I think the United States must do whatever it takes to make sure that that doesn't happen, that we prevent any use of that, because anything that expands the war is going to be bad for everybody and is only going to get more people killed. And the U.S. must avoid any expansion of this war, no matter what it takes.
Colonel Davis, the spokeswoman also said the goal of the sabotage is to revive the West's diminishing interest in Ukraine and push for additional funding. With that being said, as far as funding and arming Ukraine is concerned, who will come to their aid at this hour?
Well, that's really the kind of the most important question, and I think it's really, you're already seeing the answer out in front of you, and I think the Ukraine side sees that answer as well, and they're doing whatever they can to try and reverse it. I think that was the motivation behind announcing, this mobilization of potentially up to 500,000 additional people to say, hey, look, we're willing to put the manpower out there, but we have to have the external support with ammunition, with funding, with new artillery pieces, tanks, all of those things, air power, air defense missiles, all the things they didn't have in the summer offensive, they're going to need if they even have a prayer of anything in the future. But it's not just the U.S. Congress that has not put money behind this. Biden's request for $61 billion, which by itself was only half of what they had used in the previous year to try to, enable this offensive. So even that was only half, and they haven't gotten any of that. And others in Europe are doing the same thing. You saw in Hungary that they vetoed some support for for Ukraine and some other categories. Others are starting to do the same thing. And you see, there just aren't a bunch more tanks, armored personnel carriers. There's not enough artillery ammunition in all of Europe to be able to survive their needs. The resources simply aren't there, and I think the writing's on the wall. And Ukraine recognizes that, and they're trying to get it broken loose. I just don't think they're going to succeed, which implies they need to give thought to the unthinkable, and that is to attempt to seek a negotiated end to this war before they lose any more territory or men.
Colonel Davis, finally, it's already winters, and before the winters we were talking about a counteroffensive, but that narrative or that discussion has diminished. How would you gauge the war so far?
Well, I think that Ukraine, if they were going to have any chance of expelling Russia, they would have had to have a very successful summer offensive. Even that wouldn't have guaranteed a win, which I argued before in earlier 2023, that even a successful one probably wouldn't change the course of the war. But an unsuccessful one has, in my mind, virtually eliminated any possibility that Ukraine can win their country back by the military means. To put things in perspective, this alleged mobilization drive of Ukraine to get about 500,000 people, that's more than the entire United States Army. And you're talking about basically 500,000 privates, because those people have no military experience at all, none of them. All the people they're trying to mobilize, it is impossible to form an army of that size with no sergeants, lieutenants, captains, generals, all up with aligned with experience. You simply can't be done. It will be sending people to their graves, and it won't win against an army that does have all of those things. So in my mind, this is now to the point where it is militarily unattainable to try to succeed, and to continue to ignore that reality is not going to change the outcome, but it will get more people killed and probably more land lost for Ukraine.
All right, I've been talking to a military expert and host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube, retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis. Thank you very much for talking to us today.
Always my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.